We left him snacks at the house. He was fine. My parents said like it meant nothing after locking my 6-year-old son alone for 3 days. I cut them off without a word, took their car, and left them to deal with the ruins they created. Hey Reddit, I've never been more furious in my life. It wasn't just the fact that my parents had done something incredibly irresponsible, it was how they brushed it off afterward, like it meant nothing. Like my 6-year-old son, the child I entrusted to them, didn't matter. It all started when my husband and I had to attend a family emergency out of town. It was supposed to be a quick trip, a few days at most. We didn't have anyone else to watch our son, and we were desperate. We knew my parents were capable of handling him for a short time, even though I had always been skeptical of their ability to care for him properly. They had this old school mentality where they believed a child should just be left to fend for themselves. And if you threw in a few snacks and drinks, everything was fine. But I thought, maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should give them the benefit of the doubt for once. We left early Friday morning, and we assured my parents that we would be back Sunday evening. We left them with strict instructions. Feed him on time. Make sure he gets to bed at a decent hour. And most importantly, don't leave him alone for too long. But from the moment we left, I felt that knot in my stomach, the one that told me something wasn't right. By Saturday afternoon, when I texted them asking for an update, I didn't receive any reply. That was when I started to panic. I called them, but it went straight to voicemail. At that point, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what. I kept telling myself they must have just been busy with him, maybe taking him outside or playing some games. But as Sunday night rolled around and we were nearing our return time, that knot in my stomach was back in full force. When we finally walked through the door, I expected my parents to be there, greeting us with smiles, maybe a hug, and certainly an explanation. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I was greeted by nothing but the faint of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I called out for my son. No response. But then I heard it, a soft cry coming from the living room. When I rushed in, my heart stopped. There he was, sitting on the floor in front of the TV, his eyes red and swollen from crying. His cheeks were streaked with the remnants of dried tears, and his clothes were a mess. He looked like he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I held it together as best I could. My son looked up at me with wide eyes, but he didn't move. He was clearly too scared to do anything. I knelt beside him, trying to comfort him, but he recoiled. I couldn't understand it at first. Why was he so frightened of me? That's when he spoke, and my world shattered. He told me that Grandma and Grandpa had locked him in the house and told him to stay there while they went out. I was floored. Locked him in the house? How could they have done something like that? He wasn't even old enough to be left alone, and now I had to find out that not only had they left him alone, but they'd locked him in as well. I stormed through the house, my mind racing, trying to piece everything together. There were snack wrappers on the floor, remnants of fast food containers, and empty bottles of juice scattered around. It was obvious they hadn't fed him properly, let alone cared for him the way they promised. And still, there was no sign of them. My mind raced back to the texts, the calls, the unanswered questions. Where were they? Why hadn't they responded? And then I heard a voice behind me. It was my father walking through the front door, whistling like he had just come from a relaxing stroll. My mother was behind him, carrying a grocery bag as if nothing had happened. When they saw me standing there, they acted like nothing was wrong. My father smiled at me as if greeting me after a long trip, and my mother did the same. But I could barely hold it together. I pointed to my son, sitting on the couch, still looking traumatized. My mother just shrugged. We left him snacks at the house. He was fine, she said, dismissing the situation like it was nothing. She didn't even seem to realize how serious it was. How could they act so nonchalant about something so devastating? My father just nodded, as if agreeing with her. Kids need to learn independence, you know, he added. That was it. That was all they had to say. The same people who I thought could help raise my son, who I trusted with him, had left him alone in that house for days, and now they were acting like it was a normal thing. I don't even know how I managed to keep my composure for as long as I did. I walked over to my son and picked him up, holding him close. He clung to me, and I could feel his tiny body trembling. How could they do this to him? How could they treat their own grandson this way? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't trust them anymore. I couldn't let my son be exposed to this kind of neglect. Without saying a word to my parents, I grabbed my son's things, packed up a bag, and walked out of the house. My parents didn't even try to stop me. They just watched as I walked out the door, completely clueless about the gravity of what they'd done. I didn't even want to hear any more from them. I didn't want to waste another second. I didn't even take my car. I took their car instead. I didn't need anything else from them. Not their help, not their opinions, and certainly not their neglectful behavior. I was done. I didn't say goodbye, and I didn't look back. My son and I left that place, and I decided right then and there that they were no longer a part of our lives. The ruins they had created would be their problem to deal with. I would protect my son from them, no matter what it took. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. But as I drove away, my mind kept racing. What had happened to them? How had they become so indifferent to the well-being of their own flesh and blood? What kind of people were they now? I didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain, we were never going back. And if they wanted to fix this, they'd have to come to me, not the other way around. The drive was a blur. My son, still clinging to me, finally fell asleep in the passenger seat. His small body curled into a ball. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The weight of everything that had happened crashed over me in waves. I couldn't understand how things had escalated to this point. How had my parents, people who were supposed to care for my child, protect him, become these strangers, indifferent, and neglectful? I didn't know how long I drove, but I didn't care. It was like I was on autopilot, my thoughts consumed by everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't even bring myself to call my husband. What would I say? How could I explain what had happened without sounding like I had completely lost control? Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road. The weight of the situation felt like a 1,000-pound anchor in my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. My son stirred beside me but stayed asleep, his breathing steady and calm. I looked out at the darkening sky, wondering if I was overreacting, if this was just one of those moments where I'd get caught up in the emotion of it all and blow things out of proportion. But as I replayed my parents' dismissive words in my head, I knew I wasn't overreacting. I knew that what they had done was unforgivable. We didn't have a plan. I didn't know where to go, and I certainly didn't know what to do next. My only thought was to get away from my parents, from that house. So, I started driving again, this time with no destination in mind, just the road stretching out in front of me. As I drove, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine with my family when I knew deep down it was far from it. My son deserved better, and so did I. I needed to build a life for the two of us, free from the toxicity that had festered in my relationship with my parents. By the time we reached a small town, the sun had set completely, leaving the world bathed in a quiet, peaceful darkness. I pulled into a cheap motel and parked the car, my mind still reeling from everything. My son woke up as I gently shook his shoulder, and we both stepped out of the car into the cool night air. The motel room was nothing fancy, but it was ours. It was a refuge, a temporary place to rest, and for the first time in days, I felt like we were safe. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was all that mattered. I sat on the edge of the bed, my son curling up beside me as I quietly stroked his hair. He was still shaken by everything that had happened, and I couldn't blame him. What kind of people would lock a 6-year-old child in a house and leave him there alone for days? What kind of grandparents would treat their own flesh and blood like that? I couldn't understand it, no matter how hard I tried. And yet, there I was, a mother who had to make the hardest decision of her life, cut ties with the people who were supposed to support and care for me, who should have been a safe haven for my son. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind already racing. I knew I couldn't stay at this motel forever, but I also knew I wasn't ready to return to my parents. Not yet. Not after what they had done. I spent the day researching options, looking for a place where I could get some stability for my son and myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do it. I had to find a way to provide for him to make sure he never had to go through something like this again. By the end of the week, I had found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I spent the next few days getting things in order, making sure my son had everything he needed. I called my husband and explained everything. And though he was devastated by what had happened, he was incredibly supportive. He agreed to come back home and help us settle into our new life, and I was relieved to know that we were moving forward, even if it was one step at a time. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to confront my parents. I couldn't just walk away from them forever, not without giving them a chance to explain themselves. So I called them. They didn't answer at first and I thought maybe they were avoiding me. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I called again and this time, my father picked up. His voice was cold, distant, like he wasn't even trying to hide his indifference. I don't even remember the exact words I said to him. All I remember is telling him that I couldn't continue this relationship, that what they did to my son was unforgivable. He tried to defend himself, tried to justify their actions, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard enough. I had given them chances, over and over, but this was the last straw. I told him that I was cutting them off completely, that I would never trust them with my son again. I hung up without waiting for a response. In the days that followed, I received texts and calls from both of my parents. They were apologetic, trying to make excuses, but it was too late. I didn't want their apologies. I didn't want their guilt. I wanted nothing more than to protect my son from them. To build a future where he wouldn't have to grow up in the shadow of their neglect. I blocked their numbers and moved forward with my life. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. My son thrived in the new environment, and I was finally able to breathe without the constant fear and anxiety that had plagued me for so long. I learned that sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up, who support you, and who love you unconditionally. And I realized that I had everything I needed right in front of me. My son, my strength, and the determination to create a better life for us both. Looking back, I don't regret my decision. It wasn't easy, and it hurt more than I could ever put into words. But I knew, deep down, that cutting my parents off was the right thing to do. For my son. For me. And when I look at my son now, seeing him laugh and play without the shadow of fear looming over him, I know I made the right choice. And as for my parents, they never came to apologize in person. They never reached out again. But I had found my peace. And that was enough.